Today is the 8th class, and our speaker today is Dr. Aman Hingorani, an advocate, mediator, Supreme Court of India, and is a mediator trainer. And the student moderator today is Rohan Chatterjee. So over to you, Mr. Rohan Chatterjee.
Thank you, sir, for the very warm welcome to the students that are attending this program. Today's session will be about the role of ethics in mediation, which will be taught to us by our teacher speaker, Dr. Aman Hingorani. If there are any questions, I would request you to please put them in the chat box so that I can refer to them at the end of the session and I can ask the questions to Mr. Hingorani. And if due to the paucity of time, we're not able to go through with all the questions, I would request you to mail them to me. The mail ID is present on the invitation. So please feel free to mail me if your questions hasn't been answered. Thank you. I would like to hand over the presentation to Dr. Aman Hingorani.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but before you start, Dr. Aman, I would like to tell the students and all the participants today about a brief biodata of yours. Please hold on for a moment. So, Dr. Aman Hingorani
Sir, are you facing any problem?
I think yes, I've got it.
Yes, sir.
Aman Hingorani, Dr. Hingorani is a practicing lawyer, having been called to the bar in 1992. He is an advocate on record at the Supreme Court of India and has argued cases on diverse fields of law before the Supreme Court, including its constitutional benches, various high courts and tribunals in the country. Several of these cases have been reported and have led to change of law. Dr. Hingorani acts as a mediator in the Supreme Court Mediation Center and Delhi High Court Mediation Conciliation Center. He has also been appointed as an arbitrator by the Delhi High Court and the PhD Chamber of Commerce and Industry, New Delhi. Dr. Hingorani is an international mediator, been engaged teaching law and professional skills development since 1998 as adjunct faculty, and has taught mediation and arbitration, international trade law, constitutional law, and human rights, amongst other subjects. He has run training programs for students, law teachers, lawyers, and judicial officers. Dr. Hingorani has taught in programs at various institutions in India, including National Judicial Academy, Bhopal, State Judicial Academies at Delhi, Jodhpur, and Manipur, Campus Law Center, Delhi University, Indian Law Institute, New Delhi, and National Law Schools at Delhi, Trichy, and Mumbai, and abroad, including Keble College, Oxford University, UK, Law Schools of Cardiff, Warwick, and Sheffield Hallam Universities, UK, South Asia Institute of Advanced Legal and Human Rights Studies, Dhaka, Bangladesh. Dr. Hingorani has prepared the ADR preparatory material for the All India Bar Examination conducted annually by Bar Council of India, the ADR manual for the Federation of Indian Chamber of Commerce and Industry as its national consultant, and the mediation rules for PhD Chamber of Commerce and Industry, apart from curriculum for law courses and other activities such as the modules for Indo-British Project on Advocacy Skills Training, British Council, New Delhi. Dr. Hingorani is member, Board of Mentors, Masters, Executive in Mediation and Conflict Resolution, Maharashtra National Law University, Mumbai, the first ever MA degree program in India.
Mandeep,
He is member of the
I think
Executive Committee, Supreme Court Advocates on Records Association.
Mr. Ranveer,
Supreme Court.
Enough introduction. We'll just get into the session now.
I think a very important part is left. Dr. Engorani has authored the book, Unraveling the Kashmir Knot, a sage bestseller, which pieces together a practical and novel solution to the Kashmir issue that has escaped consideration so far. The book, www.kashmirknot.com, was released at New Delhi by then Chief Justice of India, Justice T.S. Thakur, in the presence of Justice Dalveer Bhandari, member International Court of Justice, The Hague. The foreword is by the Professor Upendra Bakshi, Emeritus Professor of Law, University of Warwick in Delhi. The book has been presented by Dr. Hengorani at various universities and organizations in the US, including at Harvard, Yale, Columbia University, Washington, DC, Atlanta, North Carolina, and in the UK, including the Cambridge, Oxford, Cardiff, Warwick, London, Sheffield, and across India at universities, think tanks, literary festivals, academic and cultural institutions. Dr. Hengorani has another 71 publications, both national and international, on varied subjects ranging from mediation to public interest litigation, jurisprudence to Bhopal gas tragedy, to the grant of intellectual property protection, to genetically modified organisms, to the dynamics of global missile proliferation. So over to you, Dr. Aman Hengorani.
Thank you for that very long but very kind introduction. Well, thank you all for being here this evening. And if this is your 8th class, then you would have mastered a large number of mediation skills, I'm sure by now. At least you'll be very clear about the role of a mediator, how mediation is done, how it is conducted, and how actually the communication, negotiation, facilitative skills of being able to run a mediation session should you be appointed as a mediator in near future. The topics of, I mean, you're still students, but the best point about mediation is anybody can be a mediator. You don't even need to be a lawyer, let alone a law student, or you could be, so long you know the skills, you're trained in the mediation strategy and the mechanism, you can just put a board outside your house and become a mediator. Today's discussion focuses more on the ethical standards of mediators. Unlike lawyers in the adversarial capacity, where you have the Bar Council of India laying down professional standards, there is no statutory body which lays down ethical conduct or which has disciplinary powers over mediators who misconduct themselves. At best, you have the ADR rules formulated by the Supreme Court in Selim Bar's case in 2005. Those ethical standards are in Rule 27, and they have been translated or incorporated by the various high courts in their rules. So, for example, you'll have each high court has their own rule-making power, and they have their own set of rules on mediation conciliation. So, a lot of high courts have incorporated these rules there. But if that is the standard which has been laid down, let us see the standard. And what I intend to do is to make this quite interactive. We'll just see what are the ethical standards suggested by the Supreme Court, and then we can probably discuss a few facts or hypothetical situations and get a reaction from all of you. Whoever does speak, please switch on your video and unmute yourself and speak.
मैं तो अब निकल रही हूँ, मुझे इतना सुनने की कोई जरूरत है नहीं.
Now, may I request everybody else who's not speaking to mute themselves? And so let's just start in very simple language. What are these ethical standards? So the first ethical standard, according to the Supreme Court, is that the mediator must uphold the integrity and fairness of the mediation process. So take a situation.
चाय पी लो. बुखार
may I request everybody to mute themselves?
Mr. Thankanchan, can you please mute everyone?
Yes. Now, the first ethical standard is uphold the integrity, fairness of
चाय
the
पीते हुए गोली
mediation
खा लेते
process.
हैं।
Now, take a hypothetical situation. Let us assume you're a mediator.
नहीं, और ये वो रोहन का कुछ काम कर रहा है साइड बाय साइड, रोहन ने कुछ भेजना है इस बीच में,
I
आप ही
think,
बना दो। मैं
Reema,
दे रही हूँ गोली।
Yes.
Reema, could you please mute yourself?
Oh, I'm so sorry.
That's the problem with technology. We don't really realize when we are muted or unmuted. Now, let us take a hypothetical situation. Let us assume you all are mediators. You're speaking to the parties after a joint session, you shifted into a private session. And that's taking a lot of time. In your private session, a party is telling you something in confidence, of course. And time is up, so you simply defer that mediation to some other day. But when you're going back home, that party calls you up and says, you know, I was discussing this thing in the private session in confidence, but I forgot to add this one particular point, which I think is important. Otherwise, you'll miss today's entire session will go waste. You must understand, I must add this fact to give the whole my discussion in perspective. Would you entertain that call? Anyone? Please feel, I mean, this is going to be an interactive session. I'm not going to put fact share each one of you to share your views, your thoughts, what you would do. Anyone? No one? Have you understood the situation? A party is calling you after mediation, after having been in a private session, wanting to add something what that party is told to you in the private session. Is that a proper thing to do? Is that a right thing to do? Or if it's since you were anyway talking to that party in private, it doesn't really make a difference if you continue that conversation on the phone later on. Nikita, you please, actually I would suggest unmute yourself, put on your video and just say what you want to say. Or your video is there, just unmute yourself. Are you able to unmute yourself? No. Could I request the host to unmute the participants as we go along? Or we don't have that facility?
We have that facility, Mr. Thankanchan. So can you please unmute everyone at the moment? Mr. Thankanchan, are you there?
Yes, sir. Now I can, because there is a connectivity problem on my side because I am traveling.
Okay.
There is some problem.
Okay, then in that case, maybe you could just suggest your you say you would not entertain that call. If you could just type in why you won't entertain that call, and if somebody else wants to also share their perspective, they can also type in the chat box.
Yes, yes.
Would you entertain the call or not entertain that call?
Yes. Okay, sir. Please come.
Sir, unmute all the students.
Yes, yes.
Yes, if everybody could be unmuted and then they can mute themselves voluntarily so that they can always mute and mute themselves.
Yes.
Okay, so Nikita, you can unmute yourself.
One second.
No.
Yes, sir. Can you hear me?
Yeah, you're audible.
I think there's an echo. Okay.
Yeah.
So my role is the mediator's professional role. I should be, if there is any conversation, I would entertain it only in that mediation room. Once I step out of the mediation room, I'm not in the professional role of a mediator, and hence it would be unethical for me to entertain such a call.
So according to you, would be unethical to entertain the call because it is not the professional role of a mediator to do so. And Sangeeta is saying in the chat that she would entertain the call. Sangeeta, why would you say that you would like to entertain the call?
Because in any case, I had been talking to the party in caucus
Yes.
in confidence. And if I am completely confident about my own independence and neutrality
Yes.
and maintain the confidentiality,
Yes.
there's no harm. I don't see any harm.
But in a mediation setting, the other side knows that you're having a private session. So
Yes, I always tell them,
Yes.
right, suppose I take the call today and next time when we meet, I tell the other party that so-and-so had called me and we had a talk with them. In fact, in my mediation, I always give my number and the email. It is there. If they anytime feel like talking to me, I'm open.
So
I personally, I do that. And I have never been, nobody said, or I never felt that way that it is a wrong thing to do. Because as long as their interest is being served, and I am true to the mediation principle of confidentiality and the neutrality, why not?
So if you have in your opening statement set down the ground rules that it is permissible for either side to get in
Yes,
touch,
yes, yes, yes,
then it's a
definitely.
different situation. But that is normally what we don't do. We, on the contrary, tell the parties that do not get in touch with us after the mediation. If that's the rule, the difference, or what Nikita is basically trying to say, I assume, is that when you're doing a private session in the mediation center, the other side knows you're doing a private session. So that private session is within knowledge of the parties. But if that private conversation is continued on the phone after the mediation session is over, without the knowledge of the other side, then that could perhaps affect not only the credibility of the mediation
Correct.
neutrality, but also the integrity and the fairness of the procedure. Because one mediation session, a private session with party A, should invariably be followed with a private session with party B.
No, but tell me, Aman, suppose, sorry, I would like to ask one thing. Suppose this is an ad hoc private mediation, correct? The parties have approached me directly. So what is the wrong? The mediation session, I am telling you right in the beginning, I set this thing rule that they are open.
Suppose, let us change the facts. Suppose you are told you're not said this and you are simply said,
no, then it is not done. Then it is not done. Obviously, if the other party, at the back of somebody's back, I entertain the other party, that is not done.
Fine.
That is not done.
So basically, then the distinction is that if it in your mind is that if you have made that a ground rule and the parties are fine with it, then there's nothing wrong. But if that is not the ground rule, then there is an ethical issue. You would not take a call behind the back of the other side. If I understand you correctly. Okay, I think it's mute. So this is just, see, the idea of putting these kind of hypotheticals is simply to illustrate why do we have the ethical standard, which is being formulated by the court. So the first ethical standard was this, which you're talking about maintaining the integrity and the fairness of the mediation process. It also must be, okay, let us put it in another situation. Suppose there is a labor management dispute. The laborer is entitled to, say, 5 lakh rupees. But he needs the money now. Management says, take 50,000 here and now. He says, very well, I'm taking, give me 50,000 to finish the case. You think it is an unfair deal. He's entitled to 5 lakhs. He's taking 50,000 because of his circumstances. Would you do anything about it, or you simply sign the deal, authenticate the particular settlement agreement?
These are the classic dilemmas.
So then what would you do? I mean, would you get into the fairness of the deal, because we're talking about integrity and fairness of the mediation process.
Yes, yes.
Would you get into the fairness of a settlement agreement?
No, in mediation, nothing is just and fair. I mean, we are not seeking justice. It is the best possible settlement between the parties which we are looking at. So if the parties are settling, who am I to tell them? That is the thing.
Anybody else? Okay, take a situation again. Suppose there's a husband-wife dispute. There's a son, 2-year-old, daughter, 3-year-old. They're very fond of each other. They do a settlement agreement saying, fine, the boy will be with the father, the girl will be with the mother. We're splitting the custody of the children. So the son can be without the mother and the sister can be without the father and the brother. You feel it is unfair to separate children, and the parents are taking a divorce, not the children.
Yeah.
It is unfair to separate children at that tender age from each other. Would you intervene?
It is better in the joint session. These
Well, their
things should be
decision.
discussed.
Though after discussion, they say it's a self-determination. We have decided. It's within the parameters of the law.
Hmm.
It's our decision.
Yes. Tough call.
So what would anybody, any ideas for the rest? We are almost 20, 25 of us. Anybody else has any idea what they would do? Or we come back to this later, probably if we have time for question answer. Let's move on to yet another, the second rule, which according to Supreme Court, the ethical standard, ensure the parties involved in the mediation are fairly informed and have an adequate understanding of the procedural aspects of the problem, of the process. So the decision has to be taken if a party is fairly informed. Let us assume you're a mediator. One of the parties is represented by a lawyer who is completely inexperienced and who has a wrong understanding of the law. This other side is represented by a team of lawyers who know the latest law, which is actually in the favor of the other side, but they don't want to tell them, obviously. So your party A, who's represented by an inexperienced lawyer, is relying on some law which is actually against his client. If he knew the latest law, his client would get much more. He's entitled to much more. The other side is experienced and well-versed, strong team of lawyers. There's a power imbalance.
Hmm.
So in that power imbalance, A is saying, I'm ready for this deal, though in law, he's entitled to much more, and he's not even aware of that law. What would you do, if anything?
In this case, I think we can address to the lawyer of that party that.
Can you tell
Mr.
a lawyer
Counsel,
you're wrong?
Mr. Counsel, would you please see this? I mean, what would your suggestion be? Could you please check and come back on the next session or something like that?
In a joint session or private session?
Join.
In a
Definitely
joint
join.
session, you'll tell one lawyer, go and look up the law.
No, it is the way you ask the lawyer, you suggest a lawyer that you please come up with, just check it and let us discuss it in the next session.
So would you rather do this, have a private session with a lawyer and say, why don't you look up this law? And just for the sake of it, have a private session with the other side lawyer. And in the meantime, try to remove the power imbalance through this way. And then if the party still says, I want to accept this, then of course,
Then it is okay.
So I would strongly recommend do this in a private session if you want to do that.
Okay.
Not in a joint session, because you'll run down that lawyer feels small before his client and the other side lawyer.
No, but Aman, I have done it. I mean, but both the party and the lawyer, they feel that, they don't feel intimidated or run down sort of feeling. They don't. They said, okay, ma'am, we will come back on this. I mean, the way you put it, the body language, your tone, verbal tone, communication, the way you communicate, everything
Right,
depends.
excellent. So now let's quickly move on to the next ethical standard. The mediator must satisfy himself or herself that he or she is qualified to undertake and complete the mediation in a professional manner. Let us assume that you're a matrimonial lawyer, and the case referred to you is that of a IPR. You've never done IPR in your life. You don't understand IPR. You feel that you'll be handicapped in even running the process or giving suggestions if you really have to, or understanding the nuances of the law because you've never done IPR. Should you take up that case because you're controlling only the process, not the outcome? Or should you tell the parties you don't know anything about that law, they can go to another mediator? What should you do?
Take the advice of an expert.
No, you're the mediator. You're controlling the process. It's IPR dispute, a trademark dispute, or a copyright dispute. You don't understand this alien is Greek to you. You don't understand the language or what that law is. You've done only matrimonial law. Do you feel you're qualified enough to do that case? Or since a mediator controls only the process, not the outcome, it doesn't really make a difference?
Personally speaking, it doesn't make a difference. It should not make a difference at any point of time during the mediation process.
Will it become an impediment during drafting the settlement agreement? If you draft the settlement agreement and you want to put in the terms, who will do what, in how much time, in what manner? If you're drafting the terms of settlement, the fact that you lack the substantive knowledge of that law, will that make a difference?
Definitely, because there are, I think there are different opinion about drafting also, Aman. I think that some says that drafting should not be done by the mediator. Some says that, the inputs are coming from the lawyers, from both the parties or the parties. And there are set pattern. But
I agree with that, but I would strongly recommend, if anybody wants to be a mediator, don't let the parties draft. Take the inputs, summarize the terms.
Yes, that is it.
Don't let them draft, because if you draft, you'll preempt many possible disputes. For example, if A says the agreement is A will pay B 1 lakh rupees, and A says in his draft that I'll pay 1 lakh by check, B turns around and says, well, I don't trust you. Your check will get dishonored. You give me cash. A will say, well, you don't trust me. I don't want this deal. If you're a mediator, you'll say A will pay B 1 lakh rupees by demand draft in the favor so-and-so within 1 week from today.
Correct.
So that this is standard practice. So you anyway don't let the parties draft. But I mean, according to me, maybe one could tell the parties that I'm not familiar with this field of law. I'm still willing to do the case, but of course with your assistance. I'm still willing to do the mediation with your assistance. And if they say, yes, we have no issues with that, go ahead. If they have issues with that, like Nandini is saying in the chat, let the parties decide themselves what they want to do. So
domain knowledge and domain expertise.
Yeah.
So that is
either get somebody who's get a co-mediator with domain knowledge, or let the parties decide. But you should disclose to the parties.
Yes.
That this is not something which you are very familiar with. Coming to the next standard, the mediator must disclose any interest or relationship likely to affect impartiality or which may give an appearance of partiality or bias. So let us assume you're in a mediation session and parties have virtually agreed. You're at the stage of dictating or summarizing the settlement terms. And suddenly you realize one of them is a very, very far distant relative. You didn't even remember that. And you know neither party knows that. Even the distant relative does not know you're distantly related. The other side has no clue about it. You're actually finalizing the terms. Should you disclose this sudden realization to the parties?
100%. One
Any
must
contrary view?
disclose. One must disclose.
Any contrary view? The rest of you don't seem to be very active.
No, I'm sorry. I think there are some answers coming up in the chat box.
Yeah, yeah, there were some previous ones, not for this one. Well, of course, you must disclose, but I would go one step further. Disclose, get them to give no objection to you to continue to do mediation in writing, rather than merely disclosing it.
Correct, correct.
Then avoid, while communicating with parties, any impropriety or appearance of impropriety. Many times, you know, there are three kinds of people in this world. Some people you like immediately, some people you dislike immediately, and some people grow on you. Suppose one of the party is such that you dislike that person instinctively, not because they're bad or anything. You just get bad vibes.
Correct.
And all of us have our own emotions, so all of us our own way of dealing with those situations. So many times you attack the person, not the problem. So if somebody is just putting us off, just by their presence or the way they're talking, they're just draining you off. If that person's personality is affecting you, and because of that you're losing interest, or you're becoming irritable, or you're becoming curt, or you're not showing any empathy, should you recuse yourself from the mediation? Because would any of this amount to impropriety, or at least not a proper role of a mediator? Should you recuse, or you should simply continue with the mediation if where a person, for no fault of the person or no fault of you, you simply feel this person is not getting the best out of me. I'm not able to do justice to this mediation.
If I can answer this question, so I feel that if any aspect of a mediation affects the mediator's neutrality to any degree, the mediator should recuse himself from the mediation.
Yeah. So that maybe without giving any reason, simply suggest that parties go somewhere else, to another mediator if it's an institutional mediator, or another mediator if it's a private one. Coming further, the mediator should be faithful to the trust and confidentiality reposed in the office of the mediator. Now, again, as you all know, that the whole idea of a mediation is when you're talking about breaking the conflict cycle, and I'm sure you all probably would have read about it by then, by now by this 8th class, that all of us we want to get something in life. If we don't get it, there's a lot of frustration. And then we start thinking, why don't we get it? So if we've not got what we want, we sit down, do a self-analysis. And if our analysis is correct, we get what we want. But if our self-analysis is wrong, and because of our self-analysis, we have modified our behavior, we'll invite an adverse reaction from the other side. And that starts the conflict cycle. I have modified my behavior in line with my self-analysis, which invites adverse reaction from the other side. That adverse reaction triggers off more modified behavior from my side, and it goes on and on. The job of a mediator, if we put it differently, is to get into the mind of the parties, to understand where that self-analysis went wrong, so as to decondition the parties, make the parties come back from the problem, and see how they want it resolved in a more rational state of mind. If that is the case, then both parties are very vulnerable to the mediator. We also know that in mediation, we let the parties do the talking. The more a person talks, the more they get attached. It's human nature. So everything comes from the mouth of the parties. What is this? Why they're taking a particular stand? What is the underlying problem? How would they define the issues? What is the underlying interest? How they would like to see the options? What are the options? How would they evaluate the options? What could be the possible solution? Everything is done from the mouth of the parties. So the parties are very vulnerable. And there's a huge amount of power a mediator has over the parties. So in that context, let us assume that there's been a mediation between parties and it's a successful mediation. The parties are very grateful to you. So one of the party comes and gives you a pen as a gift. Not expensive one, a small token, 500-600 rupees, saying that you've been very good to both of us. But I want to give you this. Should you accept it? Mediation is over. Settlement has been there. Your Conciliation Act also, or forget, before we come to Conciliation Act, let's talk about this fact situation. Should you accept, let us say he brings a box of chocolates worth 500 rupees or laddus worth 500 rupees or a pen worth 500 rupees and gives it to you. So somebody says it looks like a bribe. Okay, let's talk about laddus. He brings laddus for you. Should you accept it?
Distribute in the office.
Of course, that's one way of doing it. But you can't distribute a pen in the office. But, or would it make a difference if it was not something which is worth 400 rupees and it is a, say, expensive mobile phone of, say, 20,000 rupees? That's a complete no.
No way.
No way.
No
So
way.
let us take a situation now that, you know, even in the Conciliation Act of Section 80, which says that unless agreed by the parties, you will not appear as a lawyer or representative once, you know, in that particular subject matter of that dispute. So let us assume there's a matrimonial case which you have resolved very efficiently. And the husband is so impressed by you that he says, I have a very big business. I want you to do my company matters, unconnected with the matrimonial case. So I will give you a retainership of 2 lakh rupees a month. You be impaneled with my company to be my company lawyer. Would you accept the retainership? It is after the settlement with an unconnected matter, not the subject matter for which you were the mediator. Is there anything wrong in accepting that particular retainership?
I think there are a couple of answers that are coming in the chat box.
Actually, I don't see a, not on this point, not on this fact situation. We keep changing the hypotheticals. We keep adding facts to it. So would you accept this retainership of 2 lakh rupees a month in an unconnected matter? Yes, of course. So would it seem to the wife that in a private session, they had a deal with each other that persuade her to be more flexible on financials or visitation of the children? He said, I'll make up to you. I'll give you retainership in my company. Could she then challenge the award as being fraudulent, or there was a bias, or she was misled into signing the settlement agreement? So anybody has a view this? So Ravi is saying no, you would not accept, if I understand that correctly. Ravi says he would not accept. Why would you not accept? Because of any particular reason why you would not accept this retainership? I don't see him type. But okay, suppose in the same situation, this husband comes to you, Ravi, 5 years later and says, 5 years ago you had done my case, matrimonial case, and you've done it so efficiently. I still have never forgotten you for 5 years. I want you now to be my company lawyer. So there's a cooling off period of, say, 5 years. Is anything wrong in now accepting this retainership of 2 lakhs? So according to Sangeeta, she also says no. But again, moving on, Nikita says nothing wrong. So C.T. Ranganatha says no. Anisha says we'll accept. So the very fact that some of you saying yes, some of you saying no, so that's yet another view. I don't think there's anything wrong once the cooling off period is over. Where is the cooling off period? 6 months, 1 year, 2 years, 4 years, 5 years, 10 years? How would, where would you draw the line? What qualifies as a cooling off period? What may be a cooling off period for one party may not be a cooling off period for the other party. Yet, these are the kind of issues that can come, which we can take along. Then the mediator must conduct all proceedings related to the resolution of the dispute in accordance with the applicable law. Take a situation again, you know, where property disputes, there's no property which is bought or sold without black money. There's always a cash element. You can't be party to that, of course. Now, take a case, there's a case of specific, the suit is that of specific performance. The owner does not want to sell because the property prices have shot up. So there's a premium. He says, I want to get out of this deal. The builder says, continue with the deal. I'll pay you something extra. I'll give you something in cash, or we'll split the premium. Or maybe a landlord-tenant dispute where the landlord says, very well, I'll give you X amount of money. You vacate the property. I pay you premium. You know, as a mediator, everything is wrong. It's all illegal. It's outside the parameters of the law. And of course, what you write in the settlement agreement would be only the white transaction. That's not a problem with there. But would you let all these transactions of cash, etc., exchange of cash, counting of cash, be done in the mediation session? In other words, would you be party to something which is not strictly as per law? Anyone? There are some questions. No, not at all. Nikita is saying there's no property dispute in Delhi, or at least in, many parts of the country without any cash element. So you'll be blocking off the settlement if you don't do it. But would you do it if it's still illegal act? One is the reality, one is the law.
Go by the reality.
Go by the reality. These are issues that are very common, which because the idea why I'm doing this is just to show that what is there is what we're supposed to be following. But I think those of us who are in the mediation centers and who are there doing mediation privately know exactly what is happening also. And so, nobody can teach ethics, but at least we must know what the standards are. Recognize that mediation, yet another standard is recognize that mediation is based on the principle of self-determination by the parties, and the mediation process relies on the ability of the parties to reach a voluntary agreement. So take a situation where party A and party B have been engaged in a very, very lengthy mediation. The starting points or the initial stand of the parties was poles apart. Lakhs of differences, a difference of lakhs of rupees between the demands. Because of your efforts, and only because of your efforts, you managed to bridge the gap. Just about 10,000 rupees differences left. And now it's not a question of money, it's more a question of ego. Because they've come so far, but they don't want to take the final step. So the parties turn to you and say, you're almost like one of us now, you spend so much time in this, you know everything inside out. We leave it to you. You tell us what the only difference is left is, suppose it is the difference is say 25 lakhs and 25 lakhs 10,000. We leave it to you. Should it be 25 or 25 lakhs 10,000? Whatever you say, both of us will agree to it. Should you decide for them? Anyone? So George says would not decide at all. Sangeeta says, why don't you give a suggestion, if I understand Sangeeta correctly? So if there's a deadlock, I mean, you see, we've the principle of self-determination is that parties have to decide. So one can make a suggestion, well, split the difference or one reconsider it, etc. That's one way of going about it. What if it is actually deadlock or impasse? It's a last-ditch effort. Would your proposal, in a way, which can save that mediation at that stage deadlock, before you just terminating the mediation? Can you make a proposal? Okay, why don't you do it this way? Or you should not do that in any event whatsoever. Anyone? Brainstorm options and leave it to them. The question, Michael wants me to repeat. So Michael wants me to repeat the question. Question is very simple. Parties have left the final lap, if you want to call it, or the final teeny-weeny bit for you to decide, saying you decide, both of us will accept it. Can they outsource the decision-making power to you? And say we both agree to it. So the consensus seems to be not to decide, place all possible options or brainstorm for options and leave it for them to do. Then yet another standard is refrain from guaranteeing results. You can't really guaranteeing a result of we will settle, don't worry about it. So you can be optimistic about a settlement. You can hope for a settlement. You can't promise a settlement. There's a difference between each of these. So let's just talk. So this is some of the standards. I mean, without being exhaustive, these are some of the standards which illustrate. But then there are many other standards which are not actually even when we talk about, actually they are inbuilt. Yet another standard is you need to maintain confidentiality of the parties. That is a standard. Confidentiality, you know, is at several levels. One, whatever is said in the joint session, whatever is said in the mediation room is confidential without prejudice talks. Secondly, whatever is said in the private session is confidential. The rule across the world is whatever is said in a private session cannot be disclosed to the other side unless the mediator is authorized to do so. So mediator needs to be authorized by the parties to say, please disclose it. In India, the rule is reverse. Whatever is said in a private session can be disclosed unless a party says don't disclose it. So keep that in mind, the distinction, but still there's confidentiality. Confidentiality in the sense that the court cannot ask you what happened in mediation. Why did it not succeed at that point of time? The confidentiality is that unless parties agree, the mediator cannot be called as a witness, cannot be a lawyer, cannot be an arbitrator. So you have all these provisions. Now take a situation. Husband-wife dispute, the husband has come to you. In a private session, he tells you, I'm so fed up with my wife, I'm going to kill her. The next morning you see that the wife has been found in the park, badly assaulted, she's in a coma. Do you report to the police? Yes, is what Ronak is saying. What about confidentiality? Ravi says no. Nikita says, I wouldn't. What about confidentiality in this condition? You have a duty under Code of Criminal Procedure to report the commission of a cognizable offense. You have statutory duties under the Conciliation Act and of course also the law laid down by the Supreme Court, the ethical standards. So they're competing duties. Take another situation. One of the parties A has told you, party A tells you that party B's dog used to bark all night. It may be a prize dog, but I was so disturbed that I poisoned that dog. The dog is dead. The new dog is also barking all night. I'm going to poison that dog tonight. I'm going to commit an offense. What would you do? Anyone? Would you go and report to the police that an offense is about to be committed? Or you'll say, it was disclosed to me in a private session, it's confidential, so I can't really disclose it? So would report to the police. Well, I mean, I would also tend to agree that one confidentiality should not be allowed to extend to criminal activities, but perhaps one way of avoiding this kind of issues is in the opening statement itself, give a disclaimer when you talk about confidentiality at several levels that no, the confidentiality of course does not extend to commission of criminal offenses. So that way you're given a kind of a disclaimer upfront. So that could be one situation. Take another situation when you're talking about the mediation process. A party comes to you and says in private session that I didn't really want to come here. They just sent me here. But now that I'm here, let me understand what the other side has against me. This is only a discovery process. If I want to settle, I'll settle. I didn't want to settle, but since I'm here, I will, of course, want to know what evidence is against me. Should you continue the mediation at all or terminate it straight away?
Parties have to come on good faith.
So terminate it straight away. Because if we've seen this many times in 498A cases, the husband says, I want to settle with my wife. I can't settle if I'm sitting in jail. Please give me interim protection. Let me go to the mediation center. Once there's interim protection, it keeps continuing. You keep delaying mediation. There's no intention to settle. So whenever there's a situation where you feel that the mediation process is being misused,
Yes.
the mediation must be terminated there and then. So now, I'm just seeing the time. I mean, I can go on giving hypotheticals, but the idea of this is again now that having raised these kind of issues to show that things may not be that black and white. There are shades of gray in between, where you really don't know what is it's a slippery slope. Where would you draw the line? Where you say this is ethical conduct and this is unethical conduct. This has got nothing to do with the fact that nobody can take disciplinary action against you. At best, if somebody reports to the institution where you're impaneled, they can simply say, we'll disempanel you. That's the only consequences. But independent of that, those of us who want to do mediation in an ethical manner should be familiar with the fact that there are certain ethical standards. And those ethical standards are challenged almost on a daily basis when you do mediation. So at least when you're confronted with these issues, the first challenge is to identify, is there an ethical issue involved? And if it is, how do we deal with it? How do we address it? So that what I would stop here, since it's almost 6:06, and I would invite you to ask questions, clear your doubts, get into discussion. You can share your experiences as to how you face unethical situations and how you manage to handle them or address them, so that it's a sharing experience, a learning experience. Each one of us can learn from the other person's experiences. So, because I note, apart from students, our mediators are also here. So if anybody would like to join in, anybody would like to share the experiences, then Birji can do so, Push can do so, Sangeeta can do so, whoever would like to join in and share your experiences to see, in view of what we have discussed, how do you relate to what has actually happened in your actual mediations, and how you suggest one should overcome it. So the floor is open right now. I see Umaji is also here. Umaji can share. Anyone would like to start, or any questions?
There's a question from Amisha.
Yes. Can a mediator be held liable for professional misconduct, negligence again? How do you establish? Because if it is, let me put it this way, if a mediator is found to be guilty of misconduct or negligence, and if that gross negligence is such that it is culpable in a way, then yes, he can be held liable. But then what is the liability? You can't sue that person, but you can complain against that person that his name should be removed from the particular institution. He should not be permitted to hold the office of a mediator. But beyond that, what do you do? Unless, you see, I'm told that there are many unethical practices which are happening, which are being done by mediators, which cross the limit of being unethical. It actually gets into the aspects of criminality, where mediators may be facilitating the fabrication of documents. Mediators may be actually threatening clients to settle or give them money. Or mediators may be trying to settle a particular amount and trying to take a kickback from that. So if you're actually looking at things which go beyond unethical standard to criminality, then of course the criminal law will come into force. So that is a different issue altogether. But if you're looking at the issue of whether you can take action against a person for being unethical, in the absence of a disciplinary body, a nationalized system of accreditation of mediators, at best the institution can debar you or disempanel you, but what else can you do? So it would depend on facts and circumstances of each case. But that distinction must be kept in mind, that a mediator has no special immunity if he's going to conduct a criminal act. Any other question? Any question, any doubts, anything you'd like to share? We have experienced mediators here. I would want them to share something.
So there's another question from Anisha. She's asking, can the powers of disciplinary committee of Bar Council extend over mediators?
Not really. Not really, because I mean, you see, again, if you're looking strictly at for complying with the ethical standards in Rule 27 of the ADR rules formulated by the Supreme Court, not really. But if you're looking at a broader thing of where a person, like I say, does many other acts, which is unbecoming conduct of a lawyer, if it spills into that, fabricating documents, etc., then of course, why not? But if you're looking only at the ethical standards of laid down by the being fair to the mediation process, not getting into the fairness of a settlement agreement. Suppose somebody is saying, no, I want the agreement to be fair. That is maybe unethical, but not professional misconduct. So it would depend on the nature of that act. So if the question is for the ethical standards formulated for mediators exclusively by the Supreme Court, it may be unethical. There can be disciplinary action taken against them by the institution to the extent the rules provide. But if it goes beyond those actions to spill over into unbecoming conduct as a lawyer, then the Bar Council can step in.
Right.
Enough food for thought, I guess. So any other questions, any other doubts, anything you'd like to discuss, anything? We have the time.
Neena ji has put some question.
What is
What-
the difference? Let me just open my chat box. What is the difference between unethical conduct? Okay, what is between unethical conduct and professional misconduct? Don't disclose the evidences. No, you see that. Let me put it this way: professional misconduct would always be unethical, but every kind of unethical conduct in context of a mediation may be professional misconduct as a mediator, but not necessarily professional misconduct as a lawyer. The Bar Council of India has control, disciplinary control over lawyers registered with it for conducting themselves as lawyers. And they are supposed to have a privileged status in society, what may be still okay for a person who's not a lawyer could actually become not okay for a person who's a lawyer. Standards are higher. But in context of their engagement in a legal capacity as a lawyer. So professional conduct or professional standards laid down by the Bar Council are applicable to the lawyers there. We don't have a parallel body for mediators. A mediator need not even be a lawyer. So if a mediator is an engineer, for instance, there's no question Bar Council are having anything to do with it. Suppose a mediator is a lawyer, but he has improperly conducted the mediation process. As per the mediation ethic, the standards of ethics laid down for mediators, which may not actually be in conflict with the professional duties to a client, to the society, to the court, those kind of duties laid down by Bar Council. Then in that case, it may be professional misconduct as a mediator, and that's why he's liable for disciplinary proceeding by the institution as a mediator. But the Bar Council can't take action against that. That's not professional misconduct for the Bar Council. So those distinctions have to be kept in mind if you're looking at what are the consequences of a mediator acting improperly. Is he doing it in context of the mediation process? Is he doing it to the extent it's a criminal activity? Is he doing it to the extent he's compromising his position as a lawyer himself, where the mediator is a lawyer? It would depend on each of these situations.
There's another question in the chat box.
In a matrimonial case, husband is in jail due to default to alimony of wife, husband interested to go for mediation. Can authorities allow him for mediation? Wife is also, well, he would actually need to make an application to the competent court to say permit me to join mediation, you can do it through a video conference from jail. That's not an issue with online mediation. Or you can do it online, even wherever you are, even if it's a inhospitable environment of a jail. But if you want to do it physically, there's nothing to prevent a person from applying to the court for permission to attend mediation or for applying for bail. And if the wife is interested, the court, she can give no objection to the bail being granted and let there be a mediation. Any other question? Okay. So then I think if there are no other questions, then I would just request the push for Ranbir ji, Uma ji, Sangeeta ji, anybody would like to share their views. If not, we can then wrap up.
Yeah, we have Sangeeta ji with us. She's been participating in this, has made it rather more interactive. Sangeeta ma'am, can you please now share your views on this ethics? And Uma ma'am is there with us. If we can request ma'am also to join. We have Mr. Shiraz. We have Rajesh ji also, all very seasoned mediators with us here. Jyoti, if they would like to share their views on ethics in mediation. Because Aman has made it really very interesting. Aman, I was not aware of so many examples. We have learned so much from you. You utilize by way of example every situation. So it came out so clearly.
So, yeah, I mean, I would be, of course, interested in knowing what are the kind of issues the other mediators have faced.
We have faced many times people do ask, like supposingly during the session, they are impressed with the way we conduct ourselves as mediator, you know. Sometimes they take our numbers from the reception desk and they call us back and say, ma'am, can you please be our lawyer and give me a legal advice because I'm really impressed the way you conducted. So these are things which we get on. So, but we should not go into those roads. We should not take those routes because it is unethical. Once you are there in mediation, you cannot be related to anyone in any way. And there was another situation wherein people asked, madam, if not you as an advocate, can you please refer an advocate, suggest an advocate? So you cannot do that also. We have heard there are people who say that mediator refer matters from mediation cell to their friends, which I personally feel, and I don't endorse this kind of practice. And a mediator should never ever refer a matter to a friend that they are not represented by a proper lawyer. Can you please take their case? I'll give your name. So this is also should not be entertained at all.
And I'm sure a lot of us have faced situations where we have gone for mediation and party is late and the other party wants to start a conversation or ask questions. And
yeah, Aman, can I also share one incident which happened with me?
Yes.
Yeah, hello?
Yes.
Yes, Reema. Yes.
Yeah. So like in one of the cases, you know, the party was willing to give 10 lakhs to the other side. But the advocate came to me and told me that you should tell that they are giving 8 lakhs. You should not tell the other side, you know. So there was a collaboration between the two advocates with regard to the amount. And they were telling me to keep it as a secret and do not tell the other side what is the right amount they are going to get. And when I, you know, refused to be a part of that, they went and, you know, complained against me. And they wanted a change in the mediator also for that. So in that case, I was lucky that our judge in charge, you know, had trust in me and he spoke with me and it was handled properly. But this was a situation which was actually, you know, they were fighting with me like anything, because I think out of 10 or 8, there was 2 lakh difference, which was they were feeling to divide among themselves with what way, I don't know, or they were doing something, some hanky-panky, but I was not a part of that. But these things do happen, I think.
This happens very commonly in situations where you have a labor management dispute. The labor is normally represented by a lawyer who wants his cut, his share of, because his fees comes from the labor's settlement amount. And he doesn't trust his own client. So he would want the mediator to, in a way, ensure some cash deposit in the mediation center that he will pocket and the check payments, etc., will go to the laborer. So, and he will block a settlement. That's why we say in mediation, we call everybody who can facilitate or block a settlement, because he'll block a settlement if it is not done in a particular way. So we have
very,
these issues.
Yeah.
very true, I think, because it's not just the lawyers. Sometimes today, mediators also want to show success, so this self-determination and other things go for a toss. But I think it's like Caesar's wife must be above suspicion. So we have to be absolutely sure that we don't trespass into other territory. And as far as these ethical things, I think even as lawyers, I think all of us have to go through some session once a year just to remind ourselves. See, what is happening today is a lot of mediators are transgressing that. And I know one mediator who thought that one of the lawyers would take a cut, like you said, and took the money that was supposed to be paid to the child, went to the bank and got a fixed deposit done and came back. And there was such an uproar, and she felt it was quite all right because she felt otherwise the lawyers would get a cut. But when we tried to say that is not the job of the mediator, she couldn't understand. So I think somewhere our righteousness steps in, and we have to be very careful about that. So that neutrality is a very big question for me. How we protect that neutrality. That's what is the whole thing about ethics, I think.
Let me try to do a flip on this.
Yeah.
You know, many of these cases we have where parties have settled,
Mm.
but when they go home, they become wiser.
Yeah, that's also.
And they will try to wriggle out of it, that settlement. So, for example, divorce and mutual consent, they've agreed a particular amount. And when they go home, the mother-in-law tells, I mean, the mother of the boy tells him nothing doing, you know, to pay that kind of money to her. They want to wriggle out of it. And then what they do is when the matter is listed in court, they'll blame the mediator.
Yeah, that's also there.
We were forced to this amount. We were misled into this amount. We were not in a rational state of mind. It is not voluntary. So what the practice which has come up now is make the parties act partly on that settlement agreement in the mediation center before sending the matter to the court, so that the other principle comes into play, that once you've acted on a settlement, you're precluded or stopped from challenging it. Is that ethical?
I don't think so. No, these are all areas for which I think where we should have a discussion and then formulate, some sort of guidelines for all this. Because today there is the way people look at it in different parts of the country is also different. So I think honestly we should say, especially when there are judge mediators, for example. And normally the clients feel because this person is a judge, they would know better and what they say they can accept. In fact, in one of the JAMS seminars, the Judge Weinstein said, he tends to give a solution to them because they feel good when they go back home. The judge said, so it's okay. I don't think that sort of a thing can be done. So I think somewhere we have to have some sort of a discussion on this and then find out some basic guidelines at least so that we have something to follow up on.
Because that's more in terms of a judicial settlement, if that is what is happening,
Yeah,
where a judge is guiding.
Practically, I think he's deciding. That's what he says. That's what he does.
Now it is on and on.
Yes,
Now I can do it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, so there is, you see, like that. I mean, it's all the more reason why, like Umaji was saying, maybe in one part of the country there's one viewpoint. I mean, even the issues of judges referring, which has been an unfortunate case of referring rape cases to mediation, of course, frowned upon. The fact that where the prosecutrix as a child, and she's being told that this recent judgment is a few months old only, well, you have a child, at least he'll marry you and there'll be dismissal of the child. Why don't you settle in mediation? I think it's more, not only the ethical standards of mediators that come to play, but also judicial ethics that come to play when you're talking about making references under Section 89. So when we're talking at ethics in mediation, it starts, I would say, through, of course, within the mediation process, it has to be ethical mediation. But right from the time the matter, if it's being referred by institution, whether it's under the Section 89 of the CPC, or whether it's a mandatory institutional mediation, the Commercial Courts Act, or whatever way it may come, or a private mediation, right from the time the mediation process commences till the time it is concluded, and even till the time it's given effect to, there has to be constant reminders about the ethical standards to be maintained. So it is, so the fact situations are given is only to highlight the kind of dilemmas we face. But there is much more on mediation, which maybe on another occasion where we can talk about, because more so when we want to get into online mediation, there's a completely different facet out there as to how, because parties can record what is happening, parties can take images of what is it recording, confidentiality, the security of the data from the platform, even on the issue of how a mediator conducts himself. If in a physical setting, you can simply request a party to go out, or if you have private rooms, they can sit there. Online, if parties are in a private room, can you simply enter the room unannounced? And how do you ensure only that party is there? So there are many layers of the thing which have crept up when we're doing online mediation, which could be a subject matter of yet another discussion. But since it's almost time up, I think I would leave it here.
Sangeeta
Yeah,
ma'am has had, she was earlier muted. Ma'am, Sangeeta ma'am, please, you're welcome.
No, I had done my bit during the session. I never knew that the law students are only supposed to ask questions or answers.
We are all students.
I was very much active at that point of time. So that's what the dilemmas are there. And each case is unique. So you cannot generalize, I feel, that this has to be like this everywhere. You have to judge. I mean, taking into consideration the parties, their demeanor, and how they conduct themselves in each and every case separately. That's my view. I do not know. I stand corrected.
Did anybody else want to make a comment? I can see some videos coming on now. No, so I think with that we can, if there's nothing else somebody would like to say, we can then perhaps conclude.
Right, and we said, I think.
Yes.
Do we have
Yes,
Veena
please.
Reddy ma'am today? Do we have her with us? No, she's not there, no?
No.
No. So, Ranveer sir, I think you can then.
So
Thankanjan sir, we would like to hear from you also. Our Mr. Thankanjan sir is here. He is, I think, unavailable. So, Ranveer sir, then we can conclude the class.
Yes. So thank you very much, Dr. Aman Hingorani, for this awakening. And we feel that we'll be able to communicate again and learn from each other more and more on this aspect of ethics, as well as other aspects of mediation. Over to you, Rohan, for concluding.
So I would like to thank Dr. Aman Hingorani for such an interactive session. And the most interesting part of the session, I feel, was that there were no right or wrong answers. It was basically a stage for debate where everyone had their own explanations. So that is where our upbringings, our personalities come in. When we question ethics, there is no certain book that we can go by. That is why the world of law exists, because every law, every rule has different facets that can be argued. And I felt that that was very prevalent in today's discussion. So thank you, sir, for encouraging debate among the law students so that they can get practice for future sessions.
Thank you all. Thank you, Pushp, and
Thank you, Aman. Thank you so much, Aman. Thank you for sparing your time and just giving us beautiful insight into various aspects on ethical issues with students. Thank you so much, Aman. Thank you, Ranveer sir. Thank you, Rohan.
Thank you.